to ensure that their message is brought to the federal government, that they'll be able to effectively do that. Any need beyond our local police department as we assess the full situation, this is not something that even the state of California called for, right? I mean, so this president's desire to not only militarize and criminalize, but his commitment to drive chaos is something that I've said from the very beginning is not only reckless, but it's incomprehensible, quite frankly. So we're going to protect people's right to assemble while also ensuring that Chicagoans can get through their day-to-day.
We don't have time for a long question today, sir, so just straight to the question, and we're going to go right to Heather.
Microphone on?
Yeah, straight to the question, we're going to go straight to Heather.
Yes.
Thank you.
Jeez. I thought the theme of today's press conference was freedom of speech. At any rate, you have called on the citizens of Chicago to rise up against ICE, to resist ICE, to fight back against ICE. Many Chicagoans, including black and brown, tell me that that sounds like a call to violence. In light of the violence that we're seeing in Los Angeles now, the looting, the damage to property, the attacks on law enforcement, would you consider withdrawing that violent call to violence?
I believe in nonviolence. I believe in nonviolence.
Right. Well, you also have said that the illegal immigrants that are being targeted by ICE are the working families of Chicago. The real Chicagoans are now facing tax increases because you've spent millions of their tax dollars on migrants. They're including a grocery tax.
Okay, we need the question.
Why would you think that real Chicagoans should trust you to spend their money after you've already wasted millions of it on illegal aliens?
We are investing in people.
Is that really honestly your only answer?
We're going to go to Heather now, thanks.
Wow.
Hi, Mayor.
Hey.
I want to cast your memory back to last week when a number of older people were protesting ICE outside a facility on Michigan Avenue, and Chicago Police Department officers and supervisors were present there. Are you confident that the reaction and the response of CPD did not violate the city's Welcoming City Ordinance or the Illinois Trust Act? Did officers act appropriately during that confrontation?
What we saw was, we saw an unprecedented attack against the sensibility of our humanity. And under those circumstances, I am relieved that the number of people who were there to call attention to what ICE is doing or has done, that they were present. As far as the reaction of our police department, their responsibility was to ensure that if there was any element of that protest that could impact the safety of protesters and our residents, that they were there to ensure that safety was maximized. We are a welcoming city. The Illinois Trust Act is the law of the land. We will continue to uphold both of those policies. Of course, we're going to review and continue to review what went down last week, and there's an open meeting that's going to take place with a number of alders so that everyone is clear about the role that the local police department plays and how this particular unprecedented attack played out.
Back to a little bit of normal city news. There's a measure that just advanced out of the city's License and Consumer Protection Committee that would allow older people to ban new short-term rentals from setting up in their wards. Do you favor that initiative, which could potentially significantly decrease the amount of short-term rentals in Chicago?
You know, what I want is, I want to make sure that in everything that we do, that we continue to ensure that we're building a safe, affordable city. This particular measure, quite frankly, I'll have to look into a little bit deeper, but, I know that there are a number of alders who mean well and are trying to show up for, their particular pocket of the city. My responsibility is to ensure that whatever measure is put forth is that, the impact that will or could have on the entire city, that I keep that into full consideration. And in this instance, I would do the same.
As we look towards Saturday.
What's your name?
Oh, Whitney Wild from CNN.
From CNN?
Yes.
You just, when a new student shows up in the classroom, I'm going to notice, all right?
I know.
Welcome, CNN.
I don't come as often as I wish I could.
Well, change that.
I'm
Okay,
working on it. I'm
all
here
right.
today.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. So as we look towards Saturday, what do you anticipate the posture of the Chicago Police Department is going to be? There are large protests Saturday here and all across the country. Again, what is the posture of CPD for Saturday? And then additionally, do you know if the city is having strong communications with the event organizers to make sure that expectations for what you can and can't provide are clear?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and thank you for being here. Our first responsibility is to ensure that we keep everyone safe. That is my number one responsibility. It's what I think about every day, all day. The work that we have done collectively continues to drive violence down in the city of Chicago, because that's something that is of a top priority of mine. And so our approach won't be that much different on Saturday in terms of what our ultimate responsibility is. And when we're talking about keeping people safe, the right to assemble peacefully is a constitutional right. So we have to protect that. Now look, there are some actors that unfortunately act outside of their constitutional protection. And if that were to take place, those individuals will be held responsible and accountable. To the extent in which I can, name how we are in constant conversation and coordination with organizers, that's the strength of my administration. We talk to people. Now, there are some organizers that, that might develop over the next, week or so that, we're gonna have to identify. But when the large-scale protests took place, as there were strong voices calling for a ceasefire and the releasing of hostages, we demonstrated that we can coordinate with organizers of these demonstrations with law enforcement to keep everyone safe. That is what my expectation has always been, and I remain committed to that expectation. What's most disturbing, however, about Saturday is how the President of the United States of America is using our armed forces to celebrate him. We're gonna see a very grotesque demonstration with tanks and other military, high-powered military gear that reflects authoritarianism and dictatorship. That's something that as a leader of one of the most dynamic economies in the world, I find that to be quite disturbing. But we're gonna make sure that here locally that we demonstrate what's sensible about our democracy, and that's protecting the fundamental right to protest and demonstrate and to peacefully assemble. And if individuals work outside of those confines, we'll hold them accountable.
You might already have a policy in place for this, but just on the off chance that you don't, as we see these protests roll through, and we saw high-level supervisors out, we saw Deputy Mayor Gatewood out last night. What kind of sort of spot checks are you going to do on the Chicago Police Department's response to make sure that what the goal is actually happening in practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for acknowledging our Deputy Mayor's presence. My administration was out there. And he wasn't the only one to ensure that those checkpoints are reflective of my vision as well as the reflection of our democracy. That will continue to happen, and there will be a constant review of our practices. We've reviewed, to your colleague's question, around what happened when ICE snuck into our city and set human traps. Excuse me. You gotta be really sick and demented to do this to people. This president's reckless behavior I didn't know you could look worse than George Wallace. Our team will be present to ensure that we're holding to our values. And Deputy Mayor Gatewood and his team and our Chief of Staff, all of us are ensuring that the people of Chicago are supported and protected and their constitutional rights are intact. Thank you for that question.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Along those lines, and this may be a question for Deputy Mayor Ponce de Leon, what kind of contacts are there with the feds if are you hearing anything from ICE or federal enforcement about plans for the near future and what they may or may not be doing?
Thank you for that
or
question.
Are they even giving you any contact?
I'm going to turn it over to our Chief of Staff.
Yeah, we've received word that the federal agents have been informed that they have 48 hours to stand by and be ready to deploy. There will be tactical teams, there will be mini tanks, there will be other tools that they use in which they plan to do raids, as we saw in Los Angeles. So that information, it's actually pretty public. It has been out there and in fact on official channels. So that's what we are aware of. We have been coordinating with the state. We have been also coordinating with the county, making sure that we have open lines of communication. And Deputy Mayor Gatewood has been doing some additional discussions, coordination, and communications internally.
I spoke directly with the governor just an hour or so ago as he prepares for his testimony at the Oversight Committee. Spoke with Board President Tony Preckwinkle. It's going to take all of us to stand firm to ensure that our democracy is intact.
And what are you hearing from people in the community? I mean, we've heard some reports earlier this week that it's going back to when people were afraid to come outside or go to work or take their kids to school.
They're terrified. They are absolutely terrified. And look, I remember a few stand-ups ago when I talked about what terrorism looks like. This is it. There should be no question to what our country would look like had the Confederacy won. We're seeing it on full display. And there's no art form in this. This is literally just using the power of the federal apparatus to insert its will on whomever. Right now in our country, there's no check and balance. It doesn't exist right now. Speaker Johnson, who is third in charge if something were to happen to the President of the United States of America, won't even raise his voice. As a believer in faith and justice, these individuals are cowards. They are hypocrites. They're dangerous. There's one branch of government right now in this country, one branch. He has taken over the courts. The Congress says nothing. And so people are terrified. But in the city of Chicago, we are going to remain vigilant and firm in protecting what is sensible about our existence. And that's ensuring that the Constitution is actually maintained. Here's the bottom line is this. You either support the Constitution or you do not. And right now, this president is literally just trampling all over the Constitution right now and doing it in plain sight. And so we're going to do everything in our power. Beatrice Ponce de Leon, Deputy Mayor, we're going to make sure that people know their rights. We'll relaunch and relaunch again to ensure that people of Chicago know their rights. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you or Mary maybe update us on the investigation by the Department of Justice into the hiring? Are you having to supply documents? Have you had to do interviews? Is that something you can address?
Just before I turn over to Mary Richardson Laurie, this is so fraudulent. It's a slap in the face to the civil rights era movement. I mean, you have a president that is establishing a cabinet that looks like the country club, the oligarchs, the ultra-rich, individuals who have no background and training in the very department in which they are entrusted to serve. You know, we're very proud of the fact that we have a number of incredibly talented, capable, diverse individuals that are helping to transform our city. There's clearly benefit in the way my administration has approached governance. Violent crime is down, investments are up. So this is not about whether or not we're effective. This is about creating a distraction so that he can continue his efforts to rob working people in this country. Mary?
Mary Richardson Laurie, Corporation Counsel. We have begun to have a dialogue with the Justice Department regarding their letter. We did finally formally receive a copy of their letter in which they assert Title VII violations is their allegation, contingent upon the ongoing communications that we have with them. So we will be submitting a written response to them so they understand our position. They in turn are going to be submitting some questions to us to help to narrow the scope of their request. And then that dialogue will continue within the bounds of the law.
Thank you. Mayor, can you step back from all of this a little bit and talk about being a mayor of a blue city and the challenge of that right now? Are you all on a text chain, wondering how you're going to communicate for the next 3 years and 7 months?
What, so you can FOIA it? So that's a great question. What I will say is this. There are some fundamental differences between cities that are ran by Democrats and those ran by other members of different parties, or a different party, Republican Party. But there's one thing, though, that is consistent, is that we know that it's at the city level is where government really shows up for people. And so in that regard, that there is a universal line of communication through the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which I believe I'm going next week to talk to mayors all over the country, and they all won't be Democrats, right? They're all concerned with what I'm concerned about, whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent or otherwise. Community safety, investing in housing, healthcare, and good paying jobs or education system. You know, as far as, you know, Democratic cities, I will say that it is clear that there is more intentionality around the Trump administration to attack democratically ran cities. In fact, Governor Abbott spent millions of dollars attacking our city, literally spent millions of dollars, not trying to work in collaboration to coordinate how we can deal with what occurred or what was happening at the border. I will say, though, that our resolve is my resolve and our collective resolve still remains. I will say, though, that communication extends beyond mayors. It even speaks to community groups. I'm going to turn over to our Deputy Mayor, Ponce de Leon. She can speak about some of the work that's happening on the ground, the way in which we're all communicating to ensure that we're showing up for working people, and at this time in particular, our immigrant community.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thanks for that question. You know, our team is part of a network, a national network of immigrant affairs, immigrant rights offices out of mayor's offices. So we are certainly connected to them there and are seeing the types of activities that are going on in other cities as well. But locally, we meet and often are in touch with the major organizations that are fighting this and trying to inform residents. So the National Immigrant Justice Center, the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, the Resurrection Project, OCAD. And what we hear is certainly people are afraid, but people are also finding ways to stand up for their rights and to get connected to resources. And just a couple of the challenges right now is the need for legal support for deportation defense and for legal guidance. And as you know, we try to drive some philanthropic, private dollars in that direction, but also just send an invitation out to to lawyers and others that might want to support those efforts. That is the most pressing need that we're seeing right now. And then in working with these organizations, also pushing out not only the Know Your Rights information, but ways that families and individuals can be prepared in the case of a detention and what they can do. So I am often sharing this number, but I want to share it again. There's the hotline. It's 1-855-435-7693. That's for any immigration-related question or emergency. People recommend that give them a call. And then the shared website that is with the state and some of the organizations. And that one is good for beyond Chicago. And we're seeing, and we might see these actions happening outside of the city as well. So that is IllinoisImmigrationInfo.org. But we are in regular communication with those organizations.
Hi, Mayor. How are you? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Got it right. What do we know about the ICE tactical units that are going to be sent to, you mentioned Chicago, we know LA already, Philly, other large cities that are going to be anchors for these protests on Saturday? Do we know when they're coming, what protesters should look out for or expect?
Just as I mentioned before, yesterday the notice was given to agents that they have 48 hours to deploy. That there will be 5 cities that are targeted, Democrat-led cities, Chicago being one of them for sure, and that they were going to be targeting, workplaces in terms of the raids. We have seen, as how they've shown up in LA with the mini tanks, with arms, with also chemical agents. We have seen them in full riot gear. We have seen them fully concealed. We also witnessed last week there were deceptive practices where they text people who were expecting to go into a place to do the check-in with their immigration proceedings, and of course they were intercepted by ICE. So we can expect all of those types of tactics, inclusive of evading due process, deceptive tactics, and concealing identity, along with some of those more aggressive actions that we witnessed in LA.
And then just thinking about what happened yesterday, our crew was on the ground when a car drove through the crowd. Is there any sort of plan to try to protect large groups from vehicles, especially when we don't really know the route? Understandably, it can be difficult.
Well, we were grateful that, in the midst of this effort by the Trump administration to create chaos, that we were able to get through yesterday without mass arrests or life-altering harm. The coordination between the organizers and the Chicago Police Department is one that we're going to continue to work to strengthen, because to your point, there were a number of organizers that, though it was structured, there has to be better coordination, and that's something that we will work on. Deputy Mayor, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for that question, Sabrina. Of course, after every large incident, we do an after-action report to get a better sense of what we can improve. Nobody obviously expects someone to do what they did yesterday, so we'll make improvements on that. We already had a meeting this morning with some of our team on additional resources we'll need in place. We've been in contact directly with the governor's office about some of the support they can provide as well. So again, our teams are constantly thinking about ways to evolve and make sure folks are able to protest safely and our police are able to do their jobs. So that's what we'll continue to do on this one as well.
Hi, I guess this would be for Christina Pasiones, ICE Director in Gatewood. In terms of when ICE says they're going to have an action, what is the protocol for the CPD and what is an appropriate role for them? I was told by an activist today that under the Trust Act, it is not appropriate for them to cut off streets or do crowd control. Is that your understanding? Basically, what's the CPD's role when ICE comes in?
Let me just start off by saying that, and thank you for that question, we are a welcoming city, and that ordinance is the law of the land, the Illinois Trust Act. It's the law of the land, which simply states that our local law enforcement will not coordinate or engage or behave as federal agents. Now, if there's a federal warrant that is available, then that provides space for a different type of assessment. You know, as far as the role and the responsibility of our police department, it is to ensure that protesters can live out the Constitution safely. That is their responsibility. They also have a responsibility to ensure that, you know, in the event there are actions that are moving, that it is effectively coordinated, right? Because we don't want anyone to get injured. And so there's a certain element, I don't know what this person's definition of crowd control is, but I can tell you as mayor of the city of Chicago, I want to make sure that whether that crowd is 5 or 5,000 or 50,000, that they're protected. That is the role and the responsibility of our police department. I don't know if they have to add anything else to it. Thank you for that.
Okay, and so given that the CPD was there, ICE claims that they had final orders of removal for every one of the people they took. I've FOIA'd for those and have not gotten them from ICE yet. Is it your understanding that they did have those orders of removal?
Look, it's a great question. I don't know if anybody up here can answer that. Look, we're not federal agents. Like, we don't represent that jurisdiction. What I can say is that as someone who does represent 2.8 million people, that the President of the United States of America setting human traps, it's still unconscionable. And I know Chicago appreciates our position of being a welcoming city. We do. You know, as far as any of those final orders, you know, that's beyond our jurisdiction.
So I can just confirm those were not presented to city officials.
I don't know. They're not required to do that, I don't believe. So, you know, we'll have to get back with you on that. Like, because I want to be thoughtful here, because I don't want anyone to believe that somehow we are in coordination with the federal government. They're not just showing up, they're just showing up with tanks and setting human traps. There is no coordination between the city of Chicago and the federal government. There isn't, not particularly on this issue.
But we got to go. Monica, we got to keep going. Monica, we got to keep going.
My question is for Chief Cristina. Me gustaría que me explicara cómo se está preparando la ciudad de Chicago para las grandes protestas este próximo sábado y qué han escuchado por parte de ICE, qué podemos esperar en las próximas semanas en cuanto a operativos.
Sería mejor si el Deputy Mayor Ponce de León puede contestar, porque ella está en comunicación con las organizaciones.
¿Puedes repetir la pregunta?
¿Cómo se está preparando la ciudad de Chicago para hacerle frente a las próximas redadas, pero a las próximas protestas este próximo sábado?
Sí. Bueno, primeramente, como se ha dicho esta mañana, la ciudad se está preparando para estar seguros de que la gente tiene la capacidad y el derecho de salir a protestar de una manera segura, ¿verdad? Tomando en cuenta, al fin de cuentas, la seguridad de toda la comunidad. Entonces, con la policía va a haber manera de que ellos sigan las reglas de la ordenanza de bienvenida, sigan las reglas del estado de Illinois Trust Act, y a la vez proteger a las personas que están protestando. Pero también tomando en cuenta de que, dijo el alcalde, que hay a veces personas que pues quiebran las leyes, que causan daños, puede haber violencia y van a tener que estar preparados también para eso. En cuestión a lo que puede ser que venga ICE en estos días que siguen, ya tenemos básicamente confirmado, públicamente se ha dicho, ¿verdad?, que va a haber redadas tipo como lo que sucedió en Los Ángeles. Pueden empezar mañana, puede ser en estos días que vienen, y también nosotros no podemos interferir con el trabajo de ICE, pero tenemos que ni colaborar con ellos, ¿verdad? Solamente ver la manera de seguir protegiendo al pueblo de la ciudad de Chicago.
Mencionó anteriormente que están trabajando con las organizaciones. Cuénteme, ¿qué están haciendo específicamente?
Bueno, hablamos diariamente con líderes de las organizaciones como son ICER, el Proyecto de Resurrección, OCAD, porque sabemos que ellos están en la lucha, están informando a la gente de lo que son sus derechos, los recursos que hay para ellos, y también ellos están organizando protestas, demostraciones de una manera pacífica. Lo que quieren es que luchar en contra de lo que está sucediendo a nivel nacional, pero hacerlo de una manera que no pone en peligro a las personas que están. Y tenemos que agradecer que están tomando sus riesgos ellos mismos. Muchos son impactados y afectados personalmente. Nosotros queremos apoyarlos de una manera que también respeta lo que son las leyes de la ciudad y el trabajo de la policía de la ciudad de Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you. We will continue to organize collectively. Thank you.
Mayor, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Block Club reported today that Uber overcharged customers $1.8 million in a downtown congestion fee that was collected by the city. The company is now asking the city to pay them back because the company paid back its customers. Should the city do that?
We will be reviewing, Mary Richardson Laurie Corporation Counsel will be reviewing the allegations set forth by Uber and respond. You might be aware that we already have an active suit associated with Uber, so we will review those specifics and respond accordingly.
Gotcha. And there's already a handful of city fees on Uber rides. I understand as a measure to close the fiscal cliff that did not pass, it would have been a new 10% tax on all Uber rides in Chicago. Ubers have gotten more expensive. Do you think these surcharges and city fees have gone too far, or could we place even more on these on
Which
on
fiscal, what you talking
The
about in
transit fiscal
Springfield? The
cliff, yeah.
transit, okay, I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that we're clear. I believe that the state of Illinois, working in collaboration with the city and the county and really the entire state, of finding ways to ensure that public transportation is affordable, reliable, and safe. That is the collective responsibility and the role that I believe that we all have. You know, as far as any specific revenue proposal, again, I've stated it multiple ways and multiple times that we have an unfair structure in the state of Illinois where the ultra-rich that benefit from our city services have to take more responsibility, right? I mean, our region alone, economically, we drive this state. And 87% of the overall ridership or even economic prowess of our transportation system is right here in this region. Everybody benefits from Chicago, everybody benefits. So there has to be a more collective responsibility in this moment to ensure that that benefit is still available and that the responsibility of that benefit is equitably distributed.
Thank you, Mac. Thanks, Mac. We got to keep going. Sorry. Thanks for coming in.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mark.
Given the Commander-in-Chief's voodoo sense of rule of law, how concerned are you that this whole thing is going to escalate to the point that he's going to declare a warlike emergency and therefore suspend habeas corpus, with the result being that the 14th Amendment and due process just go out the door, which is provided in the Alien Enemies Act?
Well, it's clear that that's what he's doing. Those are his intentions, right? You know, what I find interesting, though, is that, you know, you asked about how worried or concerned. This is where this is so pharisaical, right? Because the same individuals that are worried that government is too big, you know, this president and his party, you know, are sending masked men with war weaponry, you know, into cities and creating checkpoints in cities and disappearing people without the due process, right? I mean, he's already doing that. This is no longer a threat. He's doing it, you know, and, you know, the same people who are supposedly concerned about government overreach and civil liberties, they're doing it. what our response has to be is to ensure that, we protect, people's basic fundamental rights. That's why I said before, Mark, you're either for the Constitution or you're against it. And, you have people who are lining up, the ultra-rich, to extract more out of this economy, putting poor people and working people in desperate states and trying to create chaos to create division within community groups. And we're saying enough is enough in Chicago. Coming after vulnerable people, no matter who they are, is a threat to all of us. And so that's why we're going to continue to work to build a safe, affordable city, but also to ensure that we're protecting the rights of all of our residents. Thank you for that question.
And given what's happening to Ross Baraka now, how inoculated are you from going the same way, whether you're personally there or not, to uphold sanctuary city status or doing it from your office?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I don't believe this is about sanctuary city solely. It's not. I mean, I think that's a component of it. This is not just about sanctuary city. Again, this is about our fundamental right to be able to live peacefully in a nation that has yet realized its full potential. As far as my own, personal inoculation or how I show up in this moment, unafraid, unbossed, unbought, I'm Chicago. We stay ready.
So don't be scared.
Don't be scared. And you know what, Mark? You can clock that too.
Good afternoon, Mayor. Last week, we reported that ICE subpoenaed the clerk's office for the personal information of city key applicants, many of whom are immigrants. Mayor, what's your reaction overall to the federal government going after this info, and what should the future of city key be in light of this risk?
Mary.
Thank you for the question. We responded to that request for information, and we respectfully declined within the bounds of the law, given the privacy issues and specifically the exposure of groups like domestic violence victims, which would have been exposed had that information been provided, which would have been in contravention to their rights. We will continue to monitor activity, all administrative warrants, as we are doing now, and we've put a process in place should we receive future administrative warrants from this administration.
Mayor, can I also just get you to opine on just the overall tactic of the federal government going after this data?
It's bad and it's wrong.
Since you responded to ICE saying you won't comply, have you received communications from them? And is there any world, such as a threat of contempt of court charge, where the city would turn these documents over?
The issuance of an administrative warrant is just that. Administratively, it's not a court-ordered process. Should they move towards a court setting, we will respond in kind. But we have provided a response to them on that specific issue. As we have in some other categories, we produce documents that we do think we're obligated to produce, but with respect to City Key, we don't believe such an obligation exists.
Hey, Mayor.
Hey.
Following up on Justin's question, what do you want to see passed in this rideshare worker ordinance? Specifically, do you support forcing Uber and Lyft to pay drivers as much as the ordinance is seeking?
Well, look, the reason why we're bringing everyone to the table is so that we have a policy that works for industry and the workers. That's always my drive, whether it's paid time off, whether it's, $11 billion of new investments on the southeast side of Chicago, that those impacted by the policy see their values attached in whatever product we produce. So we're going to continue to work with industry and ensure that their voice is heard at the table. That's probably unique. I know that hasn't always been the practice of the fifth floor. I can tell you firsthand, when previous administrations made decisions about my existence, they didn't necessarily have voices like mine at the table. So I'm very sensitive to that. But we also have to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that people have a good wage so that they can continue to live in this beautiful city.
And switching gears, the argument we've heard from protesters at the ICE office last week is that CPD helped ICE out because they assisted with traffic control. And if they weren't helping ICE keep the streets clear, then ICE would have had to dedicate more agents to do that themselves. Do you think that argument makes sense?
It's the job of the local police department to keep people safe. That's their job. It's what I think about every single day. Here, I hope this isn't seen as a stretch, but just from a liability perspective, especially, you know, Mary Richardson and Laurie and I, we deal with this all the time, that in some instances where government is responsible for or has been made responsible for certain accidents that have occurred, that has, you know, created some level of a weighted burden, right? And so it's not a coordinated effort to see families deported and separated. Let's just pause for a second. This is what we're talking about. There's what Trump is doing. That's our problem. It's what Trump is doing. Trump is disappearing people. Trump is militarizing forces. That's what he's doing. What our local police department has a responsibility to do is that when people assemble, that they are protected so that their rights are ensured. That's the role that I have as the mayor of the city of Chicago, is to ensure that the First Amendment is protected. Now, is there room to continue to review our practices? Of course, this is unprecedented. But we have one clear opposition in this country right now. One. That's my focus. We're going to ensure equity and justice is maintained in this city, that he can come after us in any form in which he pleases. How we show up for one another, that's what's most critical here. You know, it's not just immigration. He's trying to erase Black history from our collective story as Americans. You know, here's the same person who is cutting off food and medicine to people. All I'm saying is, look what else he's doing. We have to be able to keep our eye on everything. He is deranged and unwell. It's important that we remain focused on who our opposition is. But we'll continue to review all of our practices to ensure that people of this city know that they are loved and protected and supported.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Am I it? I guess I'm it, right? Kind of follow up to Charlie's question about if Trump sends military here. I mean, is there anything you guys can do? Would you file legal action against the administration? I know the state of California has. I mean, what will you do if the military is sent here?
Look, I spoke with, as I said earlier, I spoke with the governor directly. I spoke with Board President Preckwinkle. We're all, you know, committed to ensuring that the city, the county, the state as a whole, that we maintain, you know, the sensibilities of our democracy, right? The ability for us to freely express and express, you know, protest. Like, that's fundamental to our democracy. You know, as far as any particular action that the city or the state or the county or what we would do, particularly as a city, this is a necessary fight for all of us to be able to push back. Whether we use the courts or whether we continue to protest and raise our voices, dissent matters in this moment. Now look, he is abusing his power. We warn people, though. You all know we warn people. I've been saying this for months before the November election, that there are those in this country who have not accepted the results of the Civil War. And it's a war on our culture. It's a war on our democracy. It's a war on our humanity. I am counting on all of Chicago to resist in this moment, because whatever particular vulnerable group is being targeted today, another group will be next. Now, look, I know that there is an effort to divide us in this moment, but none of us are immune from this disease. So we'll do everything in our local power. We'll work with everyone to ensure that our city is the vibrant place, the diverse place that it has been.
And shifting gears to CPS, as you know, the school board is meeting right now, and they're expected at the end to choose an interim CEO. If it is Magdalene King, who is part of your administration, do you think it's a good choice, given the fact that she has some issues on her personnel record? And if she is the choice with those issues on her personnel record, what kind of message do you think that sends to the CPS community?
Well, right now, the message that's being sent to the CPS community is that, you know, unfortunately, we have an outgoing person who just refused to manage. You know, the budget that was put forward last year, as we told people, was just, it wasn't a real one. It's just make-believe, just speculation. It was lazy. As the board makes a decision on who the right person is to lead our district through this transition, it has to be someone that reflects the values that I've fought for my entire education career. That's the thing that's most important here.
But should that person have violations on their personnel record?
The person has to reflect my values. And my values are, we have to have a school district that works for every single child. Now look, I'm not gonna get into any speculation around, you know, who the final person will be, but I do know that there was a very thorough process as I directed the board members to go through, to vet, and to take that thorough process before the democratic body. And, you know, democracy at this point in our city's history is probably more important than it's ever been. So, you know, we're gonna have a school district that maintains class sizes that are smaller and manageable, libraries and librarians, social workers and counselors. We're gonna make sure that we have a school district that provides extracurricular support and protects the LGBTQ community, the immigrant community, and Black history, veteran educators. That's the school district that people voted for. And that's the school district in which we are transitioning into. And I'm looking forward to, as we build a school district that reflects those values, that we have a leadership team that is committed to doing the hard work to ensure that our values are also reflected in how we invest in people. All right, thank you all very much. You all have been great today.
Thank you.
Yep.